Welcome to Wooden Sticks, another great edition ahead. Looking forward to this conversation with one of my good friends and coworkers at Bally Sports. He is Ryan Carter. Ryan and I go way back. I covered him back when he played college hockey at Minnesota State. I watched him play at White Bear Lake. And then we have a good friend that coached him in Green Bay, and Marco Sicchi. And then obviously in his time in the National Hockey League, we're always so proud when we see Minnesota guys on the cusp of winning a cup. Right now, Kyle Oposo, a guy I covered when he played for the Gophers, is likely going to win a cup with the Florida Panthers. We watched Ryan Carter do just that back in 2007 with the Anaheim Ducks. And then I had a chance to really get to know Ryan when he was a player for the Minnesota Wild. And I'll never forget covering him throughout that time. 2016, they had that Stadium Series game with the Blackhawks at the Gopher Football Stadium. Vanek and Halla scored a goal, former Gophers, which is pretty cool, back on campus, all that great stuff. But for me, it was most exciting to see a Minnesota kid like Ryan Carter, who played high school hockey just a few miles away at White Bear Lake, score a goal in that hockey game, to watch Minnesota throttle the Blackhawks back when the Hawks were winning cups and were one of the top teams in the National Hockey League. And he was always one of my go-to interviews. There are always different guys you look for in different scenarios, but Ryan, and I've talked to him about this, he was always a guy that if the team had a tough night, and a lot of guys didn't want to talk, like you couldn't bring out Mikko Koivu after a 7-1 loss in Dallas because he might literally take your head off. Ryan Carter was a guy that you could bring out there and he could put things in perspective. And if the team didn't play well, he wouldn't give you a bunch of cliches. He'd give you some thoughtful answers. And it would be, I think, a big piece to, all right, we're going to be better next time. And the fans that are watching are very, rabid hockey fans and big Minnesota Wild fans. They want to hear somebody say something. And so he was that guy. And he did a lot of great things in the league, specifically for Minnesota. I think he was great behind the scenes as a mentor to young players, worked his tail off, played with toughness, could score a big goal, as I mentioned. But I think you could see some of that where he is now in broadcasting and that comfort he had. You could see some of that back then in his personality, and it's all played out that way. He's made this transition from player to broadcaster look a lot easier than it is. He's unbelievably good at his job, and we are so lucky to have him. And for me, remember, when I'm working a Wild game, I'm running around down in the bowels of the arena, down by the locker room, most often in that tunnel behind the Wild bench, at least during home games. On the road, I'm usually in the Zamboni area, up on the glass. And there's a lot of times when, whether I'm moving or whether I'm, getting shoved out of the way in the Zamboni area for the skaters to go out there and sweep the ice. Bottom line is, I listen to the game more than I see the game. And so I've got LaPanta and Carter or LaPanta and Walls in my ear the entire time. And they're painting that picture for me. And I'm going to try to use whatever they're saying and incorporate that into my interviews. He's tremendous at what he does. And so today we're going to, for certain, tap in to the White Bear Lake days and how he came to the game of hockey, his time in Green Bay playing in the USHL and getting away from home for the first time, playing for my good buddy, Marco Sicchi, and then how he ended up at Minnesota State playing for the Mavericks. And of course, we're going to talk about the Stanley Cup final, Connor McDavid, what he's seeing right now, what he saw back in the day when he won that cup 17 years ago with the Ducks. And then at some point, I really look forward to tapping into his knowledge on the team that he covers on a regular basis, the Minnesota Wild. Ryan has an interesting way of looking at the game of hockey. He sees things not just as a fan, not just as a broadcaster, but again, he's been in the locker room. He's been in those big spots. He's been in a contract year. He's gotten paid and then had to come back the next year and validate that contract. So I love listening to how he sees the game and how he sees this hockey team. And even though I'm around it every single day, he and I have a different perspective, clearly, because of his background. And so today we're going to talk about Kirill Kaprizov. Does he stay in Minnesota when that contract is up? Does he eventually lead this team to a Stanley Cup run? We're going to talk about Brock Faber and the year he just had and where he stacks up on that blue line and how valuable and how good Brock Faber can be. And then I really want to put him on the spot with the Wild's goaltending situation, because right now they've got 3 guys for 2 spots. And so we know that Marc-Andre Fleury is going to be one of the 3, but we don't know if it's going to be Gustafsson, Wallstedt, how that whole thing is going to play out. So there's going to be a lot of hockey conversation from his story, but also a lot of analysis on the Minnesota Wild. We'll also talk about the podcast world in general. He has a great show called Wild on Seventh. So these hockey podcasts, I think, can promote each other because most hockey fans are going to find them all. And we hope that some of the folks that listen to his show come over to ours and vice versa. And he and John King do an awesome job on Wild on Seventh. So yeah, Ryan Carter, girl dad, just like me, 3 daughters. We have that in common. His are a lot younger than mine, but we'll have some fun stories there as well. And just get into that wonderful career that he had, going from a youth hockey player in White Bear Lake, the rivalry with Hill Murray, on to Green Bay, to Minnesota State, and then undrafted into the league, playing for 5 different teams and making 2 different runs towards a Stanley Cup, including that victory in 2007. So a lot of fun to be had today with Ryan Carter here on Wooden Sticks. And I got to thank my good friend John Schweitz, another guy on the east side of St. Paul. He's a Hill Murray guy, so I'm certain that when Ryan Carter talks about the rivalry, John Schweitz has a different perspective, but John's a big part of my friends from the Freemasons. And when you hear that, you think of the secret handshakes and the unusual hats and those pancake breakfasts, but the Minnesota Masonic Charities would prefer that you think about the work that they do here in our community. Places like the Masonic Cancer Center at the U of M, or the Masonic Children's Hospital, or the Masonic Home in Bloomington. They're just a few examples of the important work that Freemasons support here in Minnesota. As part of the largest fraternal organization in the world, Masons have consistently answered the call when it comes to charitable needs. So happy that John Schweitz and Minnesota Masonic Charities has chosen Wooden Sticks this year to help spread that word. Looking forward to more great things from my guy Johnny and those Masons here in Minnesota. Finally, guys, it's summer. There's been some storms, but the forecast at least looks decent this weekend. Maybe Sunday's a day to get back on the water. I've got a place for you to do that. That is Bay to Bay Boat Club. It is your country club boating experience. You show up, you check in, you hop on the water. You don't have to maintain anything. There's no hauling boats and finding a spot to dock it and land it and all that other good stuff. Bay to Bay Boat Club does it for you. Call them at 952-401-3880 or head to baytobayboatclub.com. When we come back here on Wooden Sticks, one of our very own, currently a broadcaster, once a Stanley Cup winner from White Bear Lake. Up next, it's Ryan Carter. We're back on Wooden Sticks, as promised. My good friend and familiar face and voice to Minnesota Wild hockey. He is Ryan Carter, White Bear Lake's finest. Ryan, how are you today?
Hey, Corgi. I tell you what, I'm pretty darn good. I'm sporting a very dark tan right now. Lots of time on the lacrosse and soccer field without a lot of sunscreen. Golf game isn't in the shape that I'd like it to be in, but all things considered, I'm pretty darn good, my man. Thanks for asking.
Like me, you're a girl dad, three daughters. Mine are a little bit older, but I know even today, outside of lacrosse, you're still helping out on the rink coaching. So we're going to speed through this and get you to the rink so you can do some coaching. What is it like being not only a girl dad, but also a girl coach?
Yeah, so I've got an acronym for it. I'm trying to be cool, so I'm a dude. It's a DOOD, dad of only daughters. So we're fellow dudes. I tell you what, it's great. And I suppose when I was younger, I always wanted to be, not always, I suppose, but you get to your mid 20s and you're like, yeah, I'd like to be a dad. And you think about family and stuff like that. And I think that I thought what it would be like to be a dad of sons, because I was a son to a dad, and you're familiar with those relationships and stuff. And I did have 2 sisters, but I really didn't pay attention to what it was like growing up as a girl in my household. I was solely focused on whatever I was doing. But I tell you what, it's fun. It's fun with these girls. I've got 3. They're 12, 10, and 8. They're all entirely different, but all similar in ways. And we just have a lot of fun together. I enjoy, Gordy, we're on the road all the time in the winter. So whenever I'm home, I like to kind of be all in and hands on. And some of that is coaching. And I think if you ask my oldest, it's maybe a little painful for her now, because she's entering the phase of life where parents aren't cool. But it's cool to be around the girls and to know their friends and to be a part of that. And I think that's probably what I enjoy about coaching most. it's less being a part of the game. It's more being a part of their lives. So that's kind of cool.
It is really cool. And I can attest to the fact, being that I travel with you all winter, how dialed in you are. You'll get home from road trips at all hours, and you're either at the rink the next day. I know one time you had to hustle to the church for an activity there. You're always involved whenever you're home, and I do appreciate that. It's not easy to balance that. We do travel a ton in the winter, and I had this in the back of my mind for a couple of weeks as the week to connect with you. And part of the reason I wanted to connect with you is you're one of the few people I call a friend that has a Stanley Cup ring. It's a pretty cool deal. And I thought by now this year's Cup final would be over. I thought Florida was going to win this thing in 5. It hasn't turned out that way. In fact, the series has kind of flipped as of last night. Just your overall thoughts. I don't know how much you've watched, but it sure feels like Edmonton has got up off the mat here.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And I think what we're seeing is the old adage ring true, where the hardest win to get is the 4th one. You start to think about you've made it. You're 3 wins up in a series. You all of a sudden you've got this long scruffy beard. You're tired. You start to realize that, and you start to think about the party, about the jubilation, the excitement that will come with winning. And with that, I think you lose a little bit of sharpness. And I think we've seen that in Florida's game, where they've lost a level of edge to them. And from the goaltender on out, it hasn't been the same as it was probably game 2 and 3. Game 1, I think Edmonton, they played well. They just didn't get the result that they probably thought they deserved. But now they've gotten off the mat, like you said, and they started swinging. It's not easy to keep the world's best player off the score sheet for an entire series. So you knew McDavid was going to show up at some point. But I saw another, bringing this back to an experience of mine. There's only been 3 other teams in the past to go down 3-0 and to force a game 6. And I happened to be on one of those teams. I think one was Toronto in the 40s. I don't remember the second. And the third was when I was with Jersey in 2012. We went down 3-0 to the LA Kings, and then we won 4-5. And in 6, we ended up, and we thought at that point in the series, you start to feel like, wow, like we might be able to take control of this. And I think that's the moment that you start to see the other team's best again. Now, I think we'll get the best of both clubs in game 6 for Florida and Edmonton, and that's a game that I don't think anybody's going to want to miss. But the 4th one, always the hardest to win. This time of year, you can see, I mean, you look at Connor McDavid, just look at that guy. He looks tired. That beard is, I don't know, longer than my mullet. And I mean, it looks like he's got a few miles on. It's been a long year. They're on their 2nd coach, 4 playoff rounds. But they're not giving in. They're not waving the white flag. So it's fun to watch.
Yeah, they really have been left for dead multiple times this year. The terrible start to the regular season, the coach getting fired, which we can all relate to here, working the Wild beat, and then they were up against Vancouver. They were down 3-2 in that series, and then Dallas took control in that next round and was up 2-1 in the series, and was on the verge of blowing Edmonton out in game 4, and they came back to win that game. So they've been a resilient bunch. I look back at your cup run that you won, and you mentioned New Jersey, you and Parise. I do remember that series against the Kings, and I felt you guys probably could have won one of those earlier games. It might have been a different series, but the cup I'm referring to is the one you won in 2007. You guys never faced elimination, but I want to go to where Florida was last night. You come back in that Stanley Cup in game 5. You're at home against Ottawa. The cup is in the building. As players, do you see that cup being wheeled in? Do you know where that cup is, or do you try to keep that out of your mind when you're in a situation like that where you can actually win the cup that night in your building?
Yeah, I mean, you know it's there. And again, that's why that's probably the hardest win to get, because again, you get, it's nearly impossible for human nature not to creep in, and you get lost in the fantasy of winning it, of hoisting it, of realizing your childhood dream. Like you're on the last step, and you all of a sudden just get caught looking at it, and you trip a little bit. I think that's what Florida has done. Yeah. And Paul Maurice, I had him in Carolina for half a year, and he is an unbelievable motivator, great speaker. I mean, I think we've seen it in his post-game pressers. He says the right thing at the right time with the right tone. And He's one of those guys that can really rally a club. And if he's still struggling to find ways to get the Florida dialed to play these games, I think it illustrates how hard it is to just stay focused in that moment. But another good motivator is fear. And now I think all of a sudden Florida, they're going to fear having their childhood dreams taken away from them by the Edmonton Oilers. And I think then that's all of a sudden when you see, to throw another analogy out there, where there's a dog backed into a corner, that's going to be Florida, and they're going to be aggressive and they're going to be ready to play game 6. But yeah, those elimination games there, that when you're forcing a team out, it's those ones are tough to win.
I think it's great because the NBA is over now, and I think the NHL kind of can take center stage here in the middle of summer. And if we can get a game 6 and game 7, I think the ratings will be quite good, being that you've got Connor McDavid, you've got a little storyline here where they were down 3 rips. So there is some fun to be had. And I think you're right, though. I think Friday night Florida is going to put their best foot forward. They've been a great road team throughout these playoffs. So I think if Edmonton's going to win, they're going to have to play better than they have so far in this series. I'm fascinated to see what happens on Friday. But I want to go back to where it all started. Wooden Sticks, to me, the idea or concept of this podcast was to get back to where the game began for the particular guest that we have on. And I think we all know you played at White Bear Lake. You played in the USHL for Green Bay. You played for the Mavericks at Minnesota State. Played all over the NHL, won a Stanley Cup, and played with the Wild. But how did you come, Ryan Carter, to the game of hockey? What started that whole journey for you?
I tell everybody that will listen that I am solely a product of my environment. And my parents, they both lived in St. Paul, grew up in St. Paul, and they found a house in White Bear Lake that worked for them. They moved into it. Now, my father can't skate to this day. If he listens, he'll be upset because I always throw him under the bus. But he bought me, and there's a rink out back, and I'll get to that. But first, he had to get the gear, and I throw a ball right-handed, so he thought I was a right-handed hockey player. So I had to use a right-handed stick, and I'd keep flipping it over the wrong way, and he'd be hollering at me. I'd be like, I don't know, man, this is just how I play. So he had to end up trashing the right-handed stick and get me a left-handed stick. I mean, that's what my family knew, the game of hockey. Grandfathers had never played, no uncles had ever played. There was just a rink in the backyard, and my backyard butted up to a cul-de-sac on the other side. So there was like 3 or 4 houses that shared a backyard. And in that area was an ice rink. And I'd sit there from the bay window and say, I want to go out there. I want to go out there. And my parents would be like, no, come on. You don't have that stuff. No. Finally, they gave in and I went out, and I don't think I ever came back in. So I think I was young, 5 years old, 4 years old, something like that. And went out there for the first time on boots, grabbed a stick, started playing, fell in love with the game. And that's really where for me, it's Minnesota through and through, product of the environment. My parents picked that house. If they don't pick that house, if we don't live there, if that rink's not in the back, I don't think that I even play the game of hockey. So I'm thankful for that. And I'm thankful for the families that put that rink in. And I still can remember logging hours, painting boards and doing all kinds of stuff in the summer just because I loved it. I loved the game. I loved that rink so much that I wanted to make sure it didn't go anywhere. And, we'd rely on our firefighter friends to lend us the hose and the wrench to get into the fire hydrant to flood the rink. And we kind of had it all dialed back there, but that's where it all started, on that rink. And it's entirely because of that house that my parents chose.
Well, I've seen you on the golf course. You're a terrific golfer. What other sports did you play growing up? And I know hockey, it sounds like, was your first and only love, but knowing you and knowing what type of athlete you are, I imagine you played other sports. Yeah.
I mean, again, my childhood was so great because we had this neighborhood of young professionals. I think my parents were probably 30, 34, 5 years old. And the houses were, little split level houses, but there's a lot of young families. So I probably had 8 to 10 buddies within 1 year of my birthday. And we would just play in the backyard all the time. So it was kind of like Sandlot. We'd be playing home run derby. Then we'd all play baseball in the summer. Then we'd all say, all right, let's go play football. Then we'd be playing football in the front yard. And that turned into real football. We were playing 3rd and 4th grade. So growing up, it was baseball in the summer, football in the fall, hockey in the winter. And then in the spring, it would be baseball, golf, or eventually ended up running track. So I think at the high school level, I played for the most part football, hockey, and ran track.
So for hockey, I think every kid, when they start to play at a young age, they play on a different traveling teams. At what point, Cards, did you realize that not only am I a halfway decent hockey player, but I've got a pretty good shot here at playing varsity for the Bears when I'm older? Because that had to be a big deal when you come to that realization that you might be a part of high school hockey in Minnesota.
Yeah, I think it's something that I always wanted. I don't know. So I can remember getting cut from an A team to a B team, and I was pretty hurt by that. I felt that I probably got the short end of the stick, and I had a choice on how I wanted to respond to that. And I got some good advice from that same family that had the rink in the backyard. They're like, "Hey, man, you can just control what you can control." And I'll tell you what, if you're the best player on your team, you'll play on the next team that you want to play on. Doesn't matter where you're playing. Just work the hardest, be the best. And that was kind of my mindset all the time. So I really had a 12-month mindset growing up. And it was just, okay, this is, you're on the B team, try to be the best. And okay, now you made the A team, try to be the best. And I think it was probably realistic for me to play in the varsity team when I was a bantam, maybe second year bantam. And now you're ninth grade at that point. You don't know that you're going to be playing high school hockey in 10th grade, but there's the chance. You've got to do well in tryouts and different things like that. And I went in, and I actually didn't make the team out of camp or out of tryouts. So I was playing JV for half the year, but I had that same mindset. I didn't let it wreck me, and ended up playing well on JV to where the JV coaches were they said, "Hey, this guy can't play on JV anymore. He just can't." So then all of a sudden I was playing varsity and section finals. I mean, this all happened in a year, section finals, and out there for the last face-off down a goal. So it was, it went fast, but it was, I think I'd credit it just the mindset of setting a goal, but understanding that it was small steps to get there. But that was a long-winded way around saying that I think it was probably second year of Bantams where you realize, hey, my class, there might be 5 guys. My senior class, there might be 5 guys that play varsity hockey. I think there's a chance I could be one of them.
I know what it's like as a fan. I know what it's like as a broadcaster. I've got to ask you what it's like to be a player in White Bear Lake Hill Murray history, to be a part of that tradition, that rivalry, where you can argue whether it's in the cities, that one, or up north when Roseau plays Warroad, the best rivalry in high school hockey. From a player's perspective, what was that like for you?
Yeah, well, it was a lot of fun. You remember the book, The Outsiders?
Mm-hmm.
So it was like the Socias versus the Greasers or something, or the other side of the tracks. That's what it felt. That's what it felt like playing Hill Murray. You got the White Bear kids who are on the wrong side of the tracks, and you've got the Hill Murray kids who they're good. Their equipment looks good. They play good. Like everything about them was good, but you'd meet each other a couple times during the regular season, and then you knew it was going to be a dogfight in the section final. And that's honestly what it felt like. It felt like we were always the underdog, and I think Hill Murray, they have a level of polish that I think we missed at times, at least through my era, where we'd go and we'd play hard, we'd compete, but they were just a little bit more prepared for the big moments than we were. And but it was fun. It set the stage. The Aldridge Arena, it felt like the roof was going to come off that place. There's no team that we wanted to beat more than Hill Murray, and I think we had some pretty darn good games during the regular season. We ended up beating them in a section final, I think, one year. But Hill Murray, they just don't give games away ever. And through time and tracking it through other buddies and stuff, it's one thing of that program. One aspect of that program that I've learned to really respect, and Lechner does a great job. He knows how to get the best out of his club and the best out of his team at the biggest times. And unfortunately, that was a team that we had to get through. So I don't like that they had all those tactics and all that moxie, but it was a lot of fun. I mean, those are some games that I reflect on, where if I could turn back the clock and pick a moment to play again, it would probably be like a section final game against Hill Murray, despite all the big hockey that was played after that.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, those section finals at the State Fairgrounds Coliseum, I miss those days. I miss those doubleheaders. And White Bear Hill Murray, for me, just from a fan's perspective, that was better than any state tournament game that I attended as a fan. Like those games took on a different level of intensity. And I just think that the tradition of those two teams almost every year, Carts, that you could pencil in White Bear Lake and Hill Murray in that section final.
Yeah, and it was, you knew it. So you were sizing each other up during the regular season, and you knew there was a good chance it was coming down to White Bear Hill in the section final. So you had to bring your A game. And we tried to send messages during the regular season, but again, I've got to tip my cap to Lechner. He had those teams dialed at the right time, and but fun games for sure.
Yeah, tremendous coach, Bill Lechner, just a guy that year in, year out, as you mentioned, their teams don't give games away. You have to play a perfect game damn near to beat those Hill Murray teams. So high school hockey ends. We have a mutual friend in Mark Osiki, my high school teammate, who's coaching down in Green Bay. The USHL, as we know, is such a premier junior league. How do you end up playing for the Green Bay Gamblers after White Bear Lake?
Yeah, and I don't know how it all happened. I was so naive to what hockey looked like. All I wanted now, I didn't have the North Stars. The Wild came 2000, and I was just a sophomore. But I grew up wanting to be a Gopher and watching the Gophers, and so college hockey to me was like the pinnacle. And I can remember people saying, "Hey, what do you want to do when you grow up?" I was like, "I want to play hockey. I want to play Division I hockey." And they'd say, "Well, just be prepared. It's not that easy." I was set and determined to do that, but I didn't know anything about this league called the USHL. Had no clue. It's just, I know that some guys went from high school to college, and that's what I wanted to do. And that wasn't going to be a reality for me. So Marco Osiki ends up coming to a game or two watching, and he says, "Hey, we'd like to have you play for us next year." And I didn't know what that meant. And other people are talking about a USHL draft or where you can end up. And again, I had no clue about the dates, nothing. But Osiki threw, I think, something in front of me called a tender, which allowed you to sign with the team, bypass the draft, and then you could make sure that that's where you were going. And I think that Green Bay was probably the only team interested, or the only team that I had heard of. So I don't think I could have signed that thing fast enough. And it turned out to be a real good thing for me. Ended up with a good housing situation. I grew up a lot in Green Bay. I remember packing the car and driving out to Green Bay, knocking on some door 4.5 hours away to say, "Hey, I'm here to live." And they open the door and you move in with people you've never met before in their house. But I've got to give Oz credit. He was always looking out for me. He always did the right thing for me. And no, I appreciate that. That was I still keep in touch with the Billet family too, because man, I sometimes think about that too, because I'm there to play hockey, but you have this other journey outside of hockey that's like life and growing up. And I can't believe that somebody would say, "Yeah, I'll take in this 18-year-old kid who's going to eat me out of house and home, and I'm going to help him realize his dreams to play college hockey and eventually professional hockey for no reason other than it's out of the goodness of my heart." And that's what those people did for me. I was included in that, and I couldn't be more grateful.
Yeah, I had a similar experience playing in Des Moines in 1986. And you're right. You show up on their door, they take you in, they treat you like family. And I screwed up the laundry situation, something fierce my first week down there. And you know what? When I was in high school, I didn't do my laundry. I'll admit to it. It was done for me, as pathetic as that sounds. But the growing up part of it was huge for me, because that year away from home was my very first time doing that. And the bus rides and the practice, and we skated super early in the morning with an old school coach named Jim Wiley, who was super intense at 7:00 in the morning. But it was a growing up process that I absolutely needed. And I cherish that time. And you mentioned the Billet family. Mine is no longer around. They were older when they took me in. Their kids were all grown and out of the house. But I got to tell you, that was a hell of an experience. And as you know, Carts, that USHL, I mean, it was always good. It's gotten to a whole new level now. I mean, you look at the kids coming out of that league now and how prepared they are to be not only college players, but a lot of them star players that move on to the NHL. That league is really a gold mine.
Oh, there's no doubt. And I think colleges have figured it out too. I think it was when I was playing 2001, 2-ish in that era, maybe 6 guys per team would play Division I hockey. So if you went, you had a good chance. Maybe it's 6 to 10, kind of. Half your team would play
Yeah.
Division I hockey. Now every single kid on the USHL roster is going to be playing Division I hockey, and now it's bled over into the North American League, where some of 6, 7 of those guys will be playing Division I hockey. Programs have started to figure out that letting an 18-year-old kid play mature, grow up a little bit under the supervision, and it's nice. It's a nice stepping stone for that reason too. You're away from home, but you're supervised by parents, and I could see myself at 18 getting in trouble and blowing an opportunity right out of the gates. But thankfully, I was able to take that middle step to junior hockey and be supervised, take the long bus rides, learn what it was like to be on my own. Because Oz was a tough coach too. He'd say no cell phones. Game would end and we'd be on the road in Des Moines, and we'd have a 6-hour bus ride home, and there'd be no cell phones. You couldn't talk to anybody.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so you'd be sitting there. You'd have to watch the movies on the bus. We had a sleeper bus because we were a ways away, but it was tough, and at times it was lonely. But the other thing it did is it weeded out the guys that were there to have fun, and you had to be committed. And I think junior hockey and USHL, the guys that play there are committed to hockey, and I think you see the result now. They're all playing Division I hockey, and they're all impact players. Not to mention, I wouldn't be surprised if a large number of those USHL players aren't drafted coming up in a couple of weeks here.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So you mentioned earlier in our conversation here that you thought, the ultimate goal be to play for the Golden Gophers. You end up in Mankato playing for the Mavericks. Was that a part of the motivation that maybe allowed you to have those 2 really good seasons in Mankato?
Yeah, it was. And I'm in hindsight, I'm really grateful for Mankato, for the opportunity. I don't think that there would have been a better situation for me, because I was able to go into a program that we weren't quite ready to compete for a national championship, but we could compete in the WCHA. But it allowed me to go in and take ice and to play in big spots. I was on the power play freshman year, penalty kill, taking big face-offs, and every situation. The coach, he trusted me in those spots. And I don't know that would have been the case if I was behind guys like Thomas Vanek or some of these other top-notch players that the Gophers had. So I was probably awarded some opportunities having played for Mankato that I wouldn't have been awarded playing for the Gophers. And with those opportunities, I was able to learn a few things and apply them to the game. And I think that helped me move on to the next level. But I still do probably hold a little resentment for the University of Minnesota, because I always wanted to be a Gopher, but they didn't want me to be a Gopher. So I made sure to show up when Mankato was playing the maroon and gold.
I miss those old WCHA traditional matchups. I know that change is a part of life, and we're all moving into different directions in terms of college athletics these days. But I look back at when you played in the WCHA, and I look back at when I first started working in TV in this market back in 2006, and how cool it was to know that every Friday and Saturday night, that whether it was Minnesota State, Minnesota, Wisconsin, North Dakota, name the team from that old WCHA, that had to be just spectacular to be a part of that, because that league at that time was as good as any league in the country, and everybody knew Friday and Saturday night you guys were playing.
Yeah, and another element of it that was cool is it turns out I was a homebody. I think I probably would have been afraid to go out east and play someplace, or even south to Colorado or Denver, one of those spots. But I loved that it was Mankato versus Minnesota, then it'd be St. Cloud, then it'd be Duluth, then it'd be North Dakota, and we had all these great games right in Minnesota, and there'd be rivalries, and there'd be not quite equal, but close to the number of visiting fans as there would home fans. And it created such a great atmosphere. And I absolutely loved the WCHA. I share the same sentiments that you do. When it changed, I was like, how can you do this? And it's worked out for Mankato too, though, my alma mater, because they ended up being in a different league, and then they found a different path to play in national tournaments and stuff like that. But yeah, the reality was Mankato, maybe we don't come out of the WCHA ever when we're playing against Minnesota or North Dakota or Denver, because I don't know that we could recruit against programs like that. But the rivalries were fun. Every weekend meant something. And before the internet was common and cool, I can recall sitting on the WCHA website, just hitting refresh, trying to figure out where we were in the standings, what our stats were, what pairwise rankings were, and what the future might hold. Looking at the other teams, saying, "Oh, they lost one game last weekend to Michigan Tech. Okay, we'll get them." And but I certainly miss those days. That was a great league. But with that, I think college hockey is still in a pretty good spot.
And college is all about trying to look towards the future. And you end up being a Stanley Cup champion, going to 2 different Stanley Cups, playing for 5 different teams, including the hometown Minnesota Wild. But you were undrafted. So this couldn't have been something that was an absolute lock for you when you were spending time in Mankato playing for the Mavericks. So at any point, did you think I might want to go into broadcasting when you were still a college student? Because you've made, and you and I have had this conversation on numerous times together on the road, you've made the transition pretty damn seamless from where you were as a player to being on TV, having a podcast, which we're going to get to. Was that something in the back of your mind back then, Karts?
No, gosh, it may be the furthest thing from my mind. I was solely focused on playing hockey. I actually don't even know that I realized the opportunities to have a living around the game of hockey, having not played. Now, don't get me wrong. I knew that there were broadcasters and coaches and management and everything else, but those jobs to me didn't seem gettable at all because I hadn't done it before. So I was solely focused on playing. Even when I got done playing, the opportunity to do some TV stuff popped up, and I tell you what, I was anything but comfortable with that. I didn't want to jump into broadcasting. But I was encouraged to do so. I didn't have another option. So it was kind of like, yeah, at least let's try. What's worse that can happen? I fail at it. It turns out there is a little bit of pressure, and that would stink to fail at it for sure. And don't get me wrong, I darn near did. You get up there, the red light turns on, and I joke sometimes that I suffer temporary paralysis as soon as that red light comes on. But it's turned out to be so great because you get to be around, and I had anxiety when I was done playing because you're 35 years old, and I can recall people saying, what do you want to do? What are your skills? And I was like, I really have no idea. What do I want to do? I want to be like 8 years younger, go back and play again. What are my skills? Probably pulling a puck out of a corner and passing it to my D-man. I don't know, forechecking. Is that a skill? Like, how does this stuff apply to the real life? And I think it does, but I didn't know how at all. So to be able to have a job around the game of hockey, to be in an environment that I was comfortable with, people that I trust, people that would help me. Again, I couldn't be more grateful or more fortunate, but I've had an absolute blast going from the rink to the press box or the booth. It's been fun, and there's still a lot to learn. I still feel like I'm really young or new to it all. I've got maybe 4 years under my belt, but I still kind of feel extremely green when it comes to broadcasting games, but I'm enjoying it.
And one thing I've enjoyed is watching your podcast take off, so we can cross-pollinate here. Wild on 7th, for you Wild fans out there, I'm sure you've heard of it. If you haven't, you need to find it. You and John King, the Kinger, you're there till the cup shows up, is what I've been told. So how much have you enjoyed that whole process of being a co-host and playing off somebody else and having that personality, then having to be a guy that can entertain big time players, managers, coaches in that setting?
Yeah, I'll tell you where it came from for me is having followed you and Anthony around for a little bit doing the broadcast. You realize the work that goes into it, and then you kind of realize the work that went into it that went unused. So you'll have a lot of stuff prepared, and the game flow doesn't allow you to use some of the information that you've prepared. So I thought, hey, where can we use some of this in longer form content where you can kind of steer the conversation. And that's where the podcast came into play. And secondarily, a motivating factor was, Wes and I, we do roughly half the games. So if I wanted to be any good at it, I felt that I needed reps. It's like anything else. When I'm good at hockey, I'm practicing every day. So I felt if I wasn't doing every single game, I should supplement that by finding another skill, speaking or podcasting or doing something to help practice for these broadcasts. So I put those two things together, and I had a conversation with John King, who is another White Bear Lake guy, but I've always been fascinated and entertained by everything that he does, including the All Hockey Air Team, and said, would you ever consider this? He said, yeah, let's try it. So boom, here we are a couple of years later. And I think it started off as something that I used for work and to get better at work, but it's turned into something that's just fun and enjoyable to do. And we get to talk about hockey and winning and some other fun stuff along the way. It's just been great. I've enjoyed it.
I'm a regular listener, and one of the things I heard you talk about during the season last year, and I believe it, and it's playing out that way one way or the other in this Cup final, is that trophy seems to find star players. And I thought about it, and I went back in my memory to some of the Stanley Cups that I have and I've watched, and I've been a hockey fan for 50 years. It's a true statement, and we have one of those stars finally on our roster in Kirill Kaprizov, and there's a little bit of panic. You know, Minnesota sports fans, as you and Kinger talk about on your show, we're a scarred bunch of humans, and we're always wondering if the worst case scenario can play out. And right now, as we all know, Kirill Kaprizov is the most exciting thing in the history of this organization, in my opinion. Does he stay? And at some point, does he get that chance for a Stanley Cup?
Yeah. So I'll start here. I do believe that Stanley Cups follow great players, and Connor McDavid's going to win a Stanley Cup, just like Sidney Crosby did, Nathan McKinnon, Alex Ovechkin. You get these guys that are top notch, like top tier players. Like, we're not talking best on their team. We're talking somewhere near best in the league. So like your top 10 NHL players. I think Kaprizov is in that conversation. So you have that for sure. And, it's no surprise to me that McDavid's almost willing this team to, their extended life, I suppose we could call it right now. But the other thing that he has right now is more top 10 draft picks. So he has Leon Draisaitl. You go to Florida. They're built differently right now too. I think they have three of their own draft picks on the roster. It's like Ekblad,
Crazy.
Barkov, and I think like the Lucerainen, or I think that's the third one. Everybody else has been acquired via free agency or trade. But those guys were top 5 picks: Barkov, Ekblad, and then they actually had Huberdeau, who I think was like a number 3 pick, but they traded him for Tkachuk. So they have like 3 or 4 top 5 pick kind of guys. And Edmonton, very similar. They've got a few top pick kind of guys. Minnesota had to get a guy in the 5th round in Kaprizov. But what are they missing? Like, watching these playoffs right now, what are they missing? They're missing another guy like that. Like, you almost need like a 1-2 punch, so that when McDavid has a night off, Draisaitl's good. When Barkov has a night off, maybe it's Tkachuk, that's great. Or maybe it's Ekblad that shuts the door down, or whatever it is. Now, the Wild are close, but they need to catch lightning in a bottle at pick 13, or find one of these guys to be a great compliment to Kaprizov, I think, to take that next step and win 4 rounds. And the second part of that question is, does he stay? I think he does. Absolutely. I think the Wild are set up in such a way that he's going to get the dollar amount that he wants. I don't think he's going to get more money anywhere else. It's a matter of being able to provide him the resources to win and give him what he wants. And I think that they've also set themselves up to be in a spot to do that. Now, I don't think that they're going to be bottom of the barrel next year or the year after, and get a top 2 kind of pick. But as long as Matt Boldy continues on his progression and some of these younger guys step in and play, I think that they've got a chance to win. So if you give Kaprizov a chance to win and the term and dollar amount that he wants, I can't imagine why he'd want to leave. And it's my guess that he stays and he plays for the Minnesota Wild for a long time.
It's funny. I'm in my mind, as you were going through that answer about that next player, I think of Malkin and what he meant to Crosby. I look at Kane and Taves when they won those cups with Chicago, and maybe Matt Boldy could be that guy. Maybe there's somebody else out there, as you're referencing right now, that they find through the draft or via the trade, I don't know. They're going to have some cap space finally after this year. We're not going to hold you to this. This is just, again, speculation or a guess. But when training camp ends this year and the Wild get ready for game number 1, we know Marc-Andre Fleury is going to be one of those two goalies. Is it going to be Philip Gustafsson or Jesper Wallstedt that's with the Flower?
Yeah, I can't rule out that it would be all three. I really can't. I think Wallstedt has to. He still can be in the minors. Now, I think that it would be of interest to have him play games this year and meaningful games, and maybe they have a number that they'd like to see him play. But I wouldn't be surprised if they keep Marc-Andre Fleury, Gustafsson, and Wallstedt 3. And it might stink for a little bit, but the Wild had cap space as the season went on because of injuries. Now, you don't want to ever bank on injuries, but I don't think the dollar amount will crush them that much. But if they are looking to clear some space and to be able to make moves and get forwards or different things, to me, the odd man out is Philip Gustafsson. But then the question, it all of a sudden becomes, what are you going to get for him? And is it worth it? Is that dollar amount worth giving up on a 24-year-old goaltender that had the second best save percentage just a year ago? Do we need to give him some grace? And I remember Brian Burke, I've talked about this a couple of times, but I signed my first one-way contract and it was like a 3-year deal. Training camp, I wasn't great. He called me up to his booth and he said, you got a case of fat cat syndrome, buddy. You signed your 1-year deal. And now all of a sudden you don't play the way you did beforehand. He's like, get back to playing the way that you need to play to be good and effective. And I think some of that maybe happened to Philip Gustafsson. He's got a young child now. He signs a nice 3-year deal and he got maybe a little bit comfortable. And it's crazy, just a little bit of comfort and the game slips. And but I think it'd be interesting to see him on a bounce back year. So now it's year 2 of that deal, having had a rough year last year. Like, let's see what the young man's made of. And that's the risk to dealing a guy like that. I think there's a lot of goaltenders around the NHL that it's up and down and up and down. I mean, look at Edmonton's net right now. Stuart Skinner, it's been up and down, but they haven't given up on him. He was scratched 2 games in the Vancouver series, and then boom, he bounces back, and all of a sudden he's been rock solid again. Look at Devin Dubnyk. He started in Nashville. I think he made stops in Montreal, Edmonton, Arizona before he finally caught fire here in Minnesota, and he was a great goaltender for us. His 4th stop. Is Gustafsson going to be a guy like that where he's going to be all world at 28, but somebody just has to wait until he's 28 to get it? Darcy Kemper's another great example. Wild held on to him, they gave up on him, and all of a sudden, boom, he's an unbelievable goaltender for Arizona and Colorado. And it just seems to be the way for goaltenders. So that's the risk when you give up on a 24-year-old goaltender and say, I need the cap space right now, is you might be giving away a great goaltender. But it depends on what they can get back in return. Again, long-winded, but if I were to place a bet, I'd say that all 3 goaltenders are on the roster to start the year. If they end up dealing with one, I think it's obviously Wallstedt and Fleury that stay here.
Awesome answer. I like the way you broke it down. And I don't disagree, actually. I do think that, for a young goaltender to have that type of just a little bit of comfort, it changes your perspective. And when you get off to a rough start, it really did seem to snowball on him, and he never could really get out of it. There were moments, but it was one of those years where it just was not his year. And I think the going back to Sweden thing had an effect. I think the whole thing, he'd like to erase it. I think he's got more to give.
Yeah, and that's the unfortunate part about having a poor start to the season is all of a sudden that's what your season is. And when you play well, you have moments of playing good, but you've had a down season. If you start off great, you're off to a great season. If you play bad for a stretch of time, it's, oh, well, he's just fighting through it. He'll be good to go in no time. Like the trajectory changes for an entire year based off the start. And that's why I think management, coaches, everybody, they put so much emphasis on a good start because it just changes the whole complexion of a season. And Gustafsson this year didn't get off to a great start. And because of that, even when he played well, it was, oh, he's just starting to find his game. It was never like, oh, he's there, he's good. And the confidence, I think because of that, was shook the entire year. And it takes time to reset that. And hopefully the summer does that for him.
I love talking Wild with you. We've got one more Wild question, then we're going to get to our hat trick hot seat, which is 3 quickies to close the show. But This was an easy question to answer a couple of years ago. It's not so easy anymore. If the Wild are healthy on the back end, Carts, who is their very best defenseman next year?
Oof. Yeah, man. Yeah.
Right?
Good question. Yeah, it's a good question, but I actually don't think it's a competition. I think if Brock Faber can play like he did this year, and take like the mental next step, I think at times this year he was able to maintain it because he like nothing was promised to him. You know, he got big minutes, and then they had to lean on him heavily to play almost 30 a game, and then he was in a shutdown pair, then he's running a power play. So much was new to him, and he had to be on, cloud nine with the opportunity. But he also is a smart kid, and he recognizes, okay, this opportunity doesn't come around all the time, so he's able to perform. If he can maintain that level of consistency, I think there's no doubt about it. He'll be the best D man. He can play power play. He skates so well. He's a strong skater too. Like he's a different type of skater than Brodin. Brodin's like your Swedish pivots. It's smooth. It's beautiful to watch. It's efficient. Faber's like powerful. It's mean. He closes space, and when he gets to the opposition, he gets to him with a little bit of force. Like Brodin's he's gonna do like 3 sweet looking crossovers, and he's gonna poke the puck off your stick, get in good body position, and then leave it for his teammate. Faber might be able to decleat you while doing all that stuff, and it'll just take him 2 strides to close the gap. So just that level of size that he has over everybody else. He's got the intelligence to go with it. He's a right-hand shot, which I always think is coveted on the blue line. Apples to apples, if you have a clone of Brock Faber left-handed versus right-handed Faber is worth more. So I think if he can do all those things with a high level of consistency, he'll be the best. That consistency is what I think will be hard to find, because now all of a sudden opportunity is going to be given to him where it wasn't like earned and we'll test you here. There's going to be some expectation a little bit, and consistency is harder to produce with expectation.
Awesome stuff. Yeah, that's what I love. And I get all of this on the team bus, at the hotel, at the rink, in the mess hall. I love your takes and how you think about them and how you see the game. Fantastic stuff. Final quick segment here. We'll get you off to practice to go coach your daughter's team. It's called the Hat Trick Hot Seat. 3 questions, no wrong answer cards. Kind of a piggyback off what I've watched you guys do on Wild on 7th. We'll start with your very least favorite NHL city to visit when you were a player, and give us some reasons why it was your least favorite.
Oh yeah. Okay. So least favorite to play as a player was Arizona, hands down, no question about it. And it didn't matter what team I played with. There are some buildings that I just automatically felt good, and I could have slept 25 minutes the night before, and I would play at the old Joe Louis Arena, and I would have had a game. I would have played well. I loved it. I don't know what it was, just the energy in that place. I always felt great, loved it. Arizona is the exact opposite side of that coin. Every time I went there, it didn't matter what I did. I felt terrible. My legs felt like cinder blocks. I couldn't skate. I lost every battle, never scored. Like that place to me, and the lights were dark, the seats were maroon, like everything about it just owned me. So I didn't like that stop at all.
Great answer. Okay, if you've got a day on the couch, maybe it's a rainy day, maybe the wife and girls are out doing something else, giving you a little time at home, your favorite sport to watch on TV outside of hockey?
Yeah, there's really no debate on this one. Probably it's the only sport I watch with any consistency, and it's golf. And it drives my family nuts that I enjoy watching golf. But it's because I like that it's the weekend, it's the afternoon, it's the right pace. You know, it's not an intense game. But I love watching golf. The U.S. Open just ended. The kids are asking me to go for a bike ride, and they couldn't peel me away from the couch to go for a bike ride because I had to see DeChambeau hit that bunker shot and Rory miss the putt. But I love watching golf. And as a matter of fact, it doesn't have to be Saturday, Sunday. I think I could watch golf on Thursday too, round 1 of a tournament. I just enjoy watching it.
You and me both. And it's just wonderful. You can turn it on any time of the day. There's golf from Europe in the morning. There's the replay of those old Masters or PGA Championships. Then you get a weekend like this weekend where it's Rory and it's DeChambeau. at a major on a golf course like that, where it comes down to every little putt, every detail and every shot. It was spectacular drama. It surpassed football for me. For many, many years, it would have been football, but for me now, golf outside of hockey is my very favorite sport to watch. So we've got that in common. Okay, final question, and then we'll wrap it up. You've got a date night. You've got, whether it's a babysitter or a family friend watching the kids, and you can go to any restaurant in town with your wife. Money does not matter on this special occasion. What is your spot? What is your restaurant?
Well, I hate to say this, but my wife has a more picky palate than I do. So whenever I pick spots, her tastes are probably prioritized over mine. And we had a date at Young Joni. Have you ever been there?
I've been there. It's awesome.
Yeah, it was great. And we tried some new stuff, and we don't get to too many of the top tier restaurants. We should go to more, but we had a great time that night, and we'd go back there solely for the ice cream and olive oil. If you've never had it, I know it sounds awful. So instead of chocolate sauce on your ice cream, it was olive oil and sea salt. And we've been raving. Yeah, we've been raving about that since we've had it. So I think that would probably I'd take her to Young Joni for some pizza, some appetizers. I like to eat like that too. I don't like to get like a big meal in front of me. My family calls me a grazer, where I just walk by like the center island and grab a little here, grab a little there. I don't always sit down and just eat like a steak and potato. I prefer to be like a tapas kind of guy. And I think Young Joni set up that way a little bit too, where we could share an entree, share an appetizer, have some ice cream. So that's where I'd go.
Awesome stuff. Hey, I kept you 3 minutes long. You've got to get to practice. Thanks for doing this today, Karts. And I look forward to seeing you at the rink just around the corner here, as training camp's only, 2 months away?
Yeah, it's sneaking up on us. I tell you what, it was good chatting with you, Gordy. Appreciate you, man. Hope you're enjoying some downtime with the family and stuff too. Have a great rest of your summer, and we will be catching up soon. Appreciate it.
That's Ryan Carter here on Wooden Sticks. We'll come back and close the show after this quick break. Thanks, Karts. Outstanding, man.
Yeah, you're the best, Gordy. Wow, you're good at that.
Get your kids out to Canterbury. Just let me know when you want to come. If it's you and the wife and the girls, or if it's just you and the girls, just text me the night before. I'll have an envelope waiting with passes. We'll take them into the paddock where the horses get saddled. I promise those girls will have a blast.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that.
All right, I'll text you to remind you. Go, Coach. I kept you long. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. It's great. We'll talk soon, buddy.
Thanks, Karts.
Later.
We are back on Wooden Sticks. Once again, thanks to the Minnesota Masonic Charities and John Schweitz and our friends at Beta Bay Boat Club. Karen Cleary can hook you up if you need your business elevated. Hockey fans take care of their own. Call or actually email Karen Cleary, Cleary at talknorth.com to be a part of our show. And I want to thank Ryan Carter for taking time to be a part of the show today. I love hearing his story, his journey to the National Hockey League. Love how much he cares about those girls of his. I will tell you that when you travel with somebody for months on end and you spend a lot of days out on the road covering a hockey team, you really get to know these people behind the red light and the smoke and the mirrors that we use to get these games on the air. And he's always in contact with those kids, always making sure that they're feeling the love. And when he's in town, he is all in, whether it's coaching, being at home, helping out with the homework. I mean, Ryan's awesome. And you can kind of hear that in our conversation today. And it's just no surprise to me that wherever he played, he had success. And I think getting to know him from the side of broadcasting, when he played for Minnesota, the heart and soul type of player he was, and how much he could be relied on by his teammates, the respect that he earned in that locker room. I was around it, so I saw it day in and day out. And then just the personality that he has. He's a damn funny guy, and he was that guy as a player. He's that same guy on our team now as a broadcaster, keeping things light, entertaining us. Just a fun person to be around, and a super, super talented broadcaster. So it was really cool to hear his perspective on the current state of the Minnesota Wild. And frankly, as I listened to Ryan talk about it here in our conversation today, I feel good about it because, for me, I love watching the Minnesota Wild. I don't care who they march out there. I'm on board. They're my favorite team. that covered him now for 2 decades. But it's just a different level of enjoyment when Kirill Kaprizov is in the mix and out there doing what he does. And so I think Carter's right. I think Ryan's got a pretty good lead on this, that the Wild can pay him. I think he likes it here. And I think knowing him as much as I know him, he just wants to play. And I know he wants to win. And that's something that Bill Guerin and his staff have to show number 97, that they can put a team in place that will give him a chance to win. But I don't think he's looking for the big city and the bright lights. If you watch the way he goes about his business, he's a guy you got to drag off the rink legitimately every day over at Tria when they're practicing. And he doesn't really care about the media attention. In fact, if he didn't have to do any of it, he'd be a lot happier. And so we're working on that whole process, trying to get him involved. He was great when we did get him on TV this year. But honestly, he doesn't care about that stuff. He just wants to play and play at a high level, and he wants to continue to get better. And so I'm with Ryan on that. I think he does stick around. I think he does play his entire career for the Minnesota Wild. And at some point, I think he's good enough to lead this team on an impactful run to the Stanley Cup final. I think it happens in the next 5 years. I believe that. I truly do. I think Matt Boldy's a pretty good wingman to go along and help elevate this team, having that 1-2 punch. Brock Faber solidifies the blue line, and I think it will come down to goaltending. When Minnesota got goaltending last year, their numbers speak for themselves. They were a playoff team. When they didn't get the goaltending, they got themselves into some trouble, and I think that area will improve here in this next season, and I think there'll be a healthier team in front of whichever goalies are in net. So thanks again to Ryan Carter for being a part of the show, and most of all, thank you, all of you, for continuing to listen to Wooden Sticks. I love doing this. I love talking hockey. I love connecting with hockey players that have ties to Minnesota, and nobody better than the guy we had today. So Ryan Carter today on Wooden Sticks, more great shows to come. And you can always ping me on X, formerly known as Twitter. I'm at Gorgomatic21. If you have any great ideas, whether it's a high school coach, college coach, players, anybody with ties to Minnesota hockey from any different decade, whether it's current or long time ago, doesn't matter to me. If you've got an idea, I'd love to find that idea, and you can ping me at Gorgomatic21. Kevin Gorg signing off for this week. Thanks for listening. We're back with another great show sometime late next week.